the head of the National Institute of Health, Francis Collins, wrote an email to Tony Fauci calling the three of us that were the primary co-authors of the declaration fringe epidemiologists.
Right.
And then he called for a devastating published takedown of the premises. I started getting hit pieces written against me in the New York Times, again in the Washington Post, a whole bunch of other. I mean, the CBC hosted a panel of scientists who savaged us as wanting to let the virus rip and kill grandma.
Well, thank God for the Canadian
CBC.
Broadcasting Corporation. That $1.4 billion of government subsidy a year and a 1.9% market share. They're quite the stellar bunch, boy.
The level of propaganda was remarkable. Like I was calling for focused protection of vulnerable people. I was calling for a conversation among public health people how better to protect old people who were dying in droves as a consequence of not being protected by the lockdowns. I wanted, how you protect old people is complicated, right? So it depends on the local living circumstances of each person, of the old people in the community. The answer in, Alberta, in Canada is going to be very different than the answer in Southern California or something. Right. It's just going to be very different.
All those pesky complexities.
Yeah, well, you need local public health who know the living circumstances to participate in that discussion. Think creatively about how to protect older people when you have this highly infectious respiratory virus pandemic going on. Instead, we were demonized. We were told that it was impossible to protect older people without a lockdown. Mm-hmm. The lockdown didn't protect older people. It hadn't in the spring, and it didn't protect them in the fall, and did continue to not protect them. So it essentially they closed the top of the federal public health bureaucracy closed the minds of public health against the possibility of focused protection by demonizing us. Yeah. Right, and the purpose of the demonization was so that they could tell the public that every reputable scientist, the consensus of scientists, agreed with their plan.
Yeah.
Their plan to lock down.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose the motivation for that was the ability to publicly trumpet the staggering effectiveness and decisiveness of their simple and potent plan to protect, right? And so for me, again, that's a kind of unbelievably narcissistic virtue signaling. Is you want all the credit that would go along with actually dealing with the problem while doing none of the effort whatsoever necessary to actually understand the problem and to implement the complex multidimensional solutions that would be demanded.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing a podcast with you and your daughter, I think, during that time. I was quite moved actually by it, both by the devotion your daughter has to you and also the illness you were going through. So I don't think you have anything to I mean, what you went through was tremendous. Anyway, so we wrote this, started getting. I mean, but the thing is, I was emotionally better prepared to deal with the blowback from that.
Yeah.
And it became this like this thing where it was clear that the purpose was to limit the reach of the declaration. Many people still have not heard of it.
Yeah.
That probably should have heard of it. And that partly succeeded, but it didn't entirely succeed. The nucleus of this anti-lockdown movement was put in place. And then as time has gone on, what's happened is that anti-lockdown movement, as people have seen the reality, what the lockdowns really have meant, where lockdowns is not just you're forced quarantine at home. Lockdown is the ideology that we must keep people apart from each other. The ideology that we have to treat each other as biohazards.
And that the state has the right to impose that from the top down, right? Which is a major part of the ideology for everyone's good. One of the things I also knew, and I don't know how much you know about this, and maybe you know a lot about it, the Nazi eradication campaigns started out as public health initiatives. Like the causal pathway is clear. And so that discussed demonization was part of that process. But it was all put forward initially under the guise of protecting the public and doing the best even for the suffering. So it was the Nazis were extremely good at leveraging a false compassion on the narcissistic front to produce unbelievably pathological outcomes. And that went along also with the implicit notion that, well, the state has the right to do whatever's necessary if public health is at risk. And it's whatever's necessary. It's like, really, whatever's necessary, eh? Yeah, well, maybe here's my new theory, my political theory, or part of it. If your response to an emergency makes you terrified and tyrannical, and one of the consequences of that is your claim that the emergency justifies the granting of all due power to you, you are not the right leader. And there's 3 levels of evidence. Number 1, you're frightened into paralysis by the emergency, so you're too small. Second, you're willing to extend the use of tyrannical power to justify response to your fear. That's also an indication that you're not just frightened, you're a frightened tyrant. And third, the claim that you're making that the situation is so dire that you and the people who think like you must be given all the power is a moral hazard of the first order. And so there's 3 identifying features so that everyone listening and watching can understand who not to trust in the leadership position. Is the emergency terrifies them, they become tyrants, and it's so convenient that they also get all the power. It's like, no, those are not the leaders you want. Not even if the emergency is real, let alone when it's manufactured, for the benefit of people who want all the power and all the unearned credit.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that the people who draw power to themselves, you absolutely need to be skeptical. At the very least, you want checks and balances.
Yep.
Right? So, like, imagine if we'd had an honest and open debate about pandemic policy, like without this demonization, without this cancel culture kind of overlay, we would have won that debate, Jordan, because it was already clear in October 2020, first that the lockdowns had done tremendous harm or continue to do tremendous harm to the poor, the vulnerable, to working class people. It was already clear that they'd failed to stop the disease from spreading.
Yeah.
Like, what success was there? And then the third, it was already clear who the vulnerable people really were, like the highest risk people. Like, so at that point, if there'd been an open debate without this demonization, the authoritarians would have lost. The scientific consent, at the time when I wrote the declaration, I thought we actually were in the minority among scientists.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's true, actually.
Yeah, no, I
Scientists
suspect
with
it's
relevant
probably
expertise.
not. I suspect it's probably not true. But it's also almost impossible to overestimate the probability that people will be silenced by intimidation. And we